My mother abandoned me at a grocery store when I was 2. Now she wants the inheritance she never earned. I need to tell this the way it happened, from the beginning, because if I skip to the part where my mother showed up at my grandmother's while reading with her own lawyer, you're not going to believe how we got there. So bear with me. I know this is long. I've never actually written the whole thing down before, and I think I need to. My mother left me in the cereal aisle of a grocery store when I was 2 years old. Not lost track of me for a few minutes. Left me, walked out, got in her car, and drove away. A store employee found me 40 minutes later, sitting on the floor with a box of Cheerios I'd pulled off the shelf, not crying anymore because I'd already cried myself out. When the police finally tracked my mother down through the store's receipt records, she'd paid with a card 20 minutes before I was found. She looked an officer in the eye and told him she had never seen me before in her life. There's a security tape. There's a receipt. There's a car with her plates on it in the parking lot for 11 minutes with the engine running and then gone. She still said it wasn't her kid. That's the woman who now, 16 years later, wants back into my life. And I want to be honest about something up front. I don't think she wants me. I think she wants what my grandmother left me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My mother, I'll call her Michelle, because that's her name and I'm done protecting it, was charged with child endangerment and abandonment. It became a bit of a local news story for about a week, the kind of thing people share because it's so hard to understand. She was sentenced to 3 years, served about 20 months with good behavior, and her parental rights were terminated during the process. I don't remember any of it. My first real memories start a little later, in a small house with a woman I call Aunt Denise, who is my father's. I never knew him. He wasn't in the picture even before this happened. Actually, she's my mother's younger sister. My aunt, Denise, took emergency custody of me within days of the abandonment, and by the time I was 4, the adoption was final. She's the one who taught me to ride a bike. She's the one who sat in the parking lot outside my elementary school for 45 minutes on the first day of kindergarten, because she was more nervous than I was. She's the one who worked 2 jobs for years so I could do gymnastics because I loved it, even though we didn't really have the money for gymnastics. As far as I'm concerned, and as far as any reasonable person should be concerned, Denise is my mother. I've called her mom since I was 6. I knew the broad strokes of what happened to me from a pretty young age. Denise never lied to me about it. She just waited until I was old enough to actually process it, and then answered every question I ever asked, honestly, even the hard ones. What I didn't know, for most of my life, was why. Why would a mother do that to her own kid? Denise always just said, some people aren't ready to be parents, and some people never will be, no matter how much time passes. I used to think that was Denise being diplomatic. It turns out she was being precise. My grandmother, Michelle and Denise's mother, a woman named Elena who everyone called Grandma Ellie, was around for all of it. She and my mother had a complicated, mostly estranged relationship after the abandonment. Grandma Ellie never fully cut her off, but she never trusted her either, and she made her choice clear early. She was going to be a grandmother to me, full stop, no complications, no divided loyalty. Sunday dinners at her house were a fixture of my whole childhood. She taught me to make her pie crust. She kept a drawer in her kitchen just for my school photos, one for every year, going back to kindergarten. She never talked much about Michelle in front of me. I assumed it was just painful for her. I had no idea how much more there was to it. I was 17 when the first letter came. It showed up at Denise's house, addressed to me, return address a name I didn't recognize at first because it used Michelle's middle name. I think she thought that might get past me. Or maybe past Denise, before either of us clocked who it actually was. The letter was 3 pages. It talked about regret, about finding God in prison and then finding therapy after prison. About how she'd been out for years now, working a steady job at a warehouse, living quietly, and had reached a point where she felt ready to reach out. If I was open to it, she said she understood if I wasn't. She said she thought about me every day. She asked for nothing, she said, Just a chance to write if I wanted to write back. I didn't write back. I showed it to Denise, who read it twice, very still, and then handed it back to me and said, "That's your decision to make. I'm not going to make it for you. But I want you to notice something." She says she wants nothing, and then she gave you a phone number and a return address twice. I hadn't clocked that. I went back and reread it. She was right. A second letter came 4 months later. Then a third, right around my 18th birthday, which, in hindsight, and I want you to hold on to this, was also right around the time Grandma Ellie's health took a sharp turn for the worse. My grandmother had been dealing with heart failure for a couple of years, managed but serious, and that spring she was hospitalized twice in 6 weeks. I don't know exactly how Michelle found out about that, but her third letter mentioned it. "I heard your grandmother isn't doing well. I know this might be a hard time. I just want you to know I'm here if you need family." Family. That word did something to me, reading it, because I already had family. I'd had it since I was 2 years old, in a woman who never once asked to be thanked for it. My grandmother died 6 weeks after my 18th birthday. Congestive heart failure in the end, quiet at home, with Denise and me both there. I'm not going to dwell on that part because it's not really what this post is about, except to say, I loved her enormously. And losing her broke something in me that I don't think has fully healed yet, and probably won't for a long time. What I will tell you is what happened 12 days later, at the reading of her will. Grandma Ellie had a modest but genuinely significant estate, her house, which she owned outright, a decent retirement account, some savings, and a piece of rental property she'd inherited from her own parents that had appreciated a lot over the decades. All told, once everything was appraised, we were talking about just over $740,000. Her attorney, a man named Mr. Halloran, who'd handled her affairs for almost 20 years, called a formal reading with the family present, which apparently isn't always how it's done anymore. But Grandma Ellie had specifically requested it, in writing years earlier. I understand why now. Denise and I showed up, and so did Michelle, with her own lawyer. I hadn't seen my mother in person since I was 2 years old. I want to tell you that seeing her felt like something enormous, some wave of buried memory or emotion, but honestly, it mostly just felt strange. Like looking at a stranger, wearing a face that resembled mine. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, and I looked away, and Mr. Halloran started reading. The will left almost the entire estate to me, in trust until I turned 18, which I now had with Denise as trustee until that point, now released. It explicitly, by name, excluded Michelle from any inheritance, for reasons documented separately and known to my estate attorney. There was a smaller, symbolic bequest to a local children's charity. And that was it. Michelle's lawyer immediately said they intended to contest the will on grounds of undue influence, implying, more or less, that Denise had manipulated a dying woman into cutting out her own daughter, and produced, right there in the room, a folder of what he called evidence of an ongoing maternal relationship, which turned out to be copies of birthday cards and letters Michelle claimed to have been sending me for years, alongside the 3 I'd actually received. He said this established reasonable grounds that Michelle had a case for a share of the estate as a surviving child, undue influence claim aside. I sat there, 18 years old, 12 days out from burying my grandmother, watching my mother's attorney hold up a stack of cards I had never received in my life. That night, back at Denise's, I couldn't sleep, so I went looking for something, I'm still not sure exactly what, and I ended up in the box of Grandma Ellie's personal papers that Mr. Halloran had released to us. Buried near the bottom was a sealed envelope with my name on it in her handwriting. Inside was a letter she'd apparently written about 2 years earlier, to be given to me, if the time ever comes that you need to understand why. I'm not going to reproduce it word for word, because some of it is just mine, but I'll tell you what it said, because it's the reason the rest of this story makes sense. My grandmother wrote that Michelle had never wanted to be a mother, not wasn't ready, not struggled with it, but never wanted it, from the moment she found out she was pregnant with me. She'd tried, according to Grandma Ellie, to arrange a private adoption before I was even born and backed out at the last minute for reasons that were never fully clear. And from the day I came home from the hospital, she treated caring for me like a punishment she was serving. Grandma Ellie wrote that she'd watched her own daughter grow colder and more resentful for 2 years, watched her leave me with neighbors for days at a time. Watched the warning signs pile up, and that on some level, when the abandonment finally happened, it was almost a relief, because it meant someone finally had to intervene. And then there was Denise. Denise had been trying to have a child of her own for years by that point. 4 miscarriages, one of them at 19 weeks. A diagnosis, eventually, that made carrying a pregnancy to term extremely unlikely for her. Grandma Ellie wrote that in the weeks after I was found in that grocery store, it was Denise, grieving her own losses, aching for a child she couldn't have, who begged, actually begged, to be allowed to take me in, before the state even finished deciding what to do with me. She didn't take you in because she felt sorry for you, my grandmother wrote. She took you in because you were the answer to something she'd been praying for 6 years, and she has never once treated that as a debt you owe her. That's how I know she was always the right choice. And that's why I made sure everything I have goes to you, not to the daughter who never wanted it, but into hands that will actually understand what it's worth. I sat on the floor of my room and read that letter probably 6 times. Once I had that context, the evidence Michelle's lawyer produced started looking very different, and it wasn't just me who thought so, Mr. Halloran, once we showed him the folder, flagged something immediately. Several of the cards referenced things that hadn't happened yet on the dates they claimed to be sent. One birthday card, for my 16th birthday, referenced a move Denise and I made to a new house, a move that didn't happen until I was 17. A holiday letter postmarked, according to Michelle, from 3 years earlier referenced a dog we didn't get until the following year. Mr. Halloran brought in a forensic document examiner as part of preparing to fight the will contest. The findings were about as damning as you can get. The ink and paper on most of the older letters were consistent with recent manufacture, not years of aging. The postmark images Michelle's lawyer had submitted, as backup didn't match USPS formatting used in the years they claimed. In plain terms, my mother had manufactured a paper trail of a relationship that never existed, almost certainly all at once. Sometime after she learned Grandma Ellie was declining and started thinking about what was coming. That's when things stopped being just upsetting and started being genuinely frightening. Once the will contest started to fall apart on the evidence, Michelle didn't back off, she escalated. She started calling Denise's house, sometimes 4 or 5 times a day. She showed up outside my high school twice in the last weeks of my senior year, waiting in the parking lot, until a school resource officer asked her to leave the second time. She sent me messages through a fake social media account after I blocked her real one. And then, about 3 weeks after the will reading, Denise's bank called our house directly to verify a suspicious attempt to access funds related to Grandma Ellie's estate account. Someone had called in, claiming to be me, with enough of my basic information to get partway through the verification process before a fraud flag caught the mismatch in security answers. The bank's fraud department pulled the call recording. It wasn't me, it was Michelle. Mr. Halloran didn't hesitate. He said this had moved past a civil will dispute into criminal territory, and he was right. Denise and I filed a police report the same week. The forged cards and letters submitted as legal evidence, the attempted impersonation with the bank, and by that point, a pattern of repeated unwanted contact after being told directly, in writing through Mr. Halloran to stop. We also got an emergency protective order. I won't pretend the process that followed was quick. It took months. There was an investigation, a forensic accountant and document examiner formally retained by the DA's office. An actual criminal case, built around attempted fraud tied to the estate contest and identity theft related to the bank call. On top of the harassment and the protective order violation, once she showed up outside Denise's workplace 2 days after it was granted. Michelle eventually took a plea deal rather than go to trial. She pled guilty to attempted identity theft and to violating the protective order. With the fraud-related, will contest charges factored into sentencing. She was sentenced to 2 years, with the possibility of parole after serving a portion of it, plus restitution and a lengthy no-contact order that extends to me, to Denise, and to Grandma Ellie's estate. The will contest itself was formally dismissed once the forged evidence came to light. Every cent of my grandmother's estate came to me, exactly as she intended. I don't really know how to feel about any of this, if I'm honest. Part of me is relieved it's over. Part of me is angry it ever got this far. And a small, stubborn part of me still aches over the fact that I have a biological mother who, given a real chance, chose fraud over just asking to know me. I don't think I'll ever fully make peace with that, and I'm trying to be okay with not making peace with it. What I do know is who my actual mother is. It's the woman who begged a state agency to let her take in a traumatized 2-year-old before anyone even knew if that was allowed. It's the woman who worked double shifts so I could do gymnastics. It's the woman who never once, in 16 years, mentioned that everything she gave me cost her something. I used part of the inheritance to pay off the medical debt she's still quietly been carrying from those years of fertility treatments. Debt she never told me the full size of until I found the paperwork going through Grandma Ellie's old files. Because apparently my grandmother had been helping her with it in secret for years, which is a whole other thing I'm still processing. And this fall, I'm helping her finally open the little bakery she's talked about since I was in elementary school and never let herself pursue because there was always something more important, namely me. Update: 3 months later, a few people asked me to update once sentencing was finalized, so here it is. Michelle is currently serving her sentence. Earliest parole eligibility isn't for a while yet, and even then, the no-contact order stands regardless of parole status unless a court modifies it, which I have no intention of ever agreeing to. The bakery is real. It's called Ellie's after my grandmother, and it opens in 6 weeks. I'll be there for the opening, standing next to the actual mother I've had since I was 2 years old, in a life my grandmother made sure neither of us would ever have to fight for again. I know this got long. I needed to get it all out somewhere, and I think I finally have.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want more fascinating Reddit tales, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to Archives of Reddit. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.